Okay, so this video is going to cover off all of the elements of making a basic skill roll in Forbidden Lands. So hopefully this will help you all understand the fundamental framework for skills roll. I'm going to use roll 20. I have character sheet set up, so that'll help us just understand how we're going to move it through. So first of all, let's go to the skill flows. So look, the first thing that happens is you're going to be rolling a dice pool, and we'll walk through exactly what that means in a second. Then, if you haven't had enough successes or you don't have any successes, you may wish to reach get additional successes. That comes at a price. You can either use your character's pride or you can attempt to push. If you push, you can take damage to either yourself or to your equipment. And finally, if you are successful if you take damage, you can gain willpower. In addition to that, there's a bunch of things you can do to enhance your chance of making a skill roll. So the first of those is other people can assist you in making that skill roll. And you also have you can also apply modifiers to your skill roll based on a range of other factors. So a GM can just decide that something's more or less difficult. There can be other challenges placed on your dice roll. There's two additional things to consider. So that's what you do when you're making an opposed roll. So that's where you and your opponent are each rolling a skill and how that works and cancelling each other out. And finally, what happens when it's one person making the roll for the group and how that functions. So we're going to cover off all of those topics in this walkthrough. So let's just get started with the basics. Okay, so a 6 is a success and a 1 is a bane. In your custom dice, if you have them from Forbidden Lands, the crossed swords are a success and the little skull symbol is a bane. So just to be clear, you get 1s, you get 6s, and that's how it's going to look. Now in the Roll20 setup, we actually have the custom dice covers, so we can show exactly what that'll look like. Okay, so rolling a skill in Forbidden Lands is comprised of the following basic things. You have 3 pools of dice. The first of those pools is what's called base. Now base dice are normally the equivalent of your current statistic. So if you've got 3 in strength and you're rolling a crafting roll, then you will get 3 dice in your base. If you actually, this character has no skills, but if you also had 1 point in crafting, you would add 1 skill dice. And finally, if you had equipment that made you a better crafter, you would add 2 dice for gear, potentially, if it was a +2 dice effect. So in total, my dice pool would be 3 dice for base, 1 dice for skill, 2 dice for gear. And if I roll all of those dice at 1 point, we'll just flip it over here so we can see what it looks like. Actually, what we'll do is we'll just clear the chat and start again so that we don't have that problem. Okay, so let's roll again and see what happens. Okay, so what's happened here is Radis, our nominated character, has rolled 1, 2, 3, 4 successes and 1 bane off their dice roll. And they've also only got 1 dice that didn't count. So it's unlikely that they're going to want to push that roll. So let's talk about what would happen in using a more standard setup. So Radis has stealth. So he's got agility 4 and he's got 3 skill levels. So if we put that, we click on that. So what you'll see is, because I'm using the Roll20 character sheet, that's now gone to 4 dice here, 3 dice there for skill, and he has no gear, so I can roll again. Right, so he only got 1 success, and it's a base die. So what we might choose to do at this point is we might choose to push. Now, if I push that roll, I will get no disadvantages. Now, it's asked me, am I sure that I'm ready to roll that dice? So when you push a die, you can't re-roll a success and you can't re-roll a bane. So I would subtract 1 die from my pool. So where it popped up, if we go back to the pop-up, It says, is the dice pool correct? Hint, remove successes and banes. So I haven't removed the success, so I reduce his dice pool by 1, so it is now 3 dice for skill, 3 dice for stat or base, and 3 dice for skill. So I'm going to be rolling 6 dice, and I get to keep that success. So when I roll now, having hit push, I get 2 additional successes, and I have received no banes. Now, 3 successes in Forbidden Lands is a critical success, which means I've succeeded out of sight with my skill roll, and I can get additional benefits as granted by the GM or as defined in my skill write-up in the Player's Handbook. So, we jumped a bit ahead, but let's talk a little bit about the character sheet in Roll20. If you're not playing using Roll20, this won't help you very much, but it's generally a good idea to walk through. So the first thing to pay attention to is you have 4 statistics: stealth, agility, wits, and empathy. However, you can take damage to those statistics. So what we can see here is that Radis has taken 1 point of damage to his wits, which means that he would only, under normal circumstances, have a wit stat of 3, so he only gets to roll 3 as opposed to 4 dice. So if I go to a skill that uses wits, does he have one? Yes, he does. So if you have a look here, you'll see that at the moment, his insight, he's only rolling 3 dice. And that's because I've taken 1 point of damage to my wits from a previous push attempt. I have a pride, which we will talk about in a second as a way to enhance my skill roll. And I have a dark secret, I have my age, I have my reputation, which is none. We're going to talk about conditions much later on. I have a video planned to talk about conditions. I have my weapons, which we'll talk through once we get to it. And most importantly, I have talents and skills and this dice pool. So one thing to note is we were only rolling the dice from the skill and the stat in this case. He doesn't have any equipment that's helping him. However, if I were doing Pathfinder, which gives me a +1 die to survival checks when I lead the way, and we'll talk about that when we get to travel, then I would actually have survival skill, which is currently rated at 6. So because I've got wits 3 and I've got survival 3, I've got 6 dice. But if I were leading the way, a specific activity that I might do, then that would actually be 7 dice, and I would add that in to my dice pool. So if I hit this now, what you'll see is it's gone 3 and 3, again, seeing the little dotted lines. Well, because it's lead the way, I can increase that to 4, hit roll, and that will show up as an additional die. Now, quite usefully, it's given us a Bane. So if I had a Bane being applied to my wits, if I roll the first die and I just stop there, so if I don't push the skill, this Bane, 1 on a d6 in this pool, which is the skill pool, has no effect. However, if I roll again, if I push that roll and then I go cancel because I didn't reduce the stat, so I need to take that down to 2 dice because I've got a Bane and a success in my base pool, and I need to reduce my skill pool by 1. So I'm now only going to be rolling 4 dice, but if I hit push now and I hit submit, I get 1 additional success. So I've gotten 3 successes, which is that critical success, but I've taken 1 point of wits damage because I pushed. This Bane now causes damage in the after I've chosen to push. If I hadn't pushed, it would have had no effect. So in effect, I add another Bane, so you'll see that my wits has now gone down to 2. The good news for me is that because I did that, and I took that Bane, I get an extra will point. So that will be very valuable for certain talents which require me to spend willpower. You may spend 1 willpower point to automatically add 1 point of damage when you sneak attack. So if I was sneak attacking someone, I could now use up both of my willpower points and do an additional 2 points of damage if I wanted to. I could also just use 1 willpower point and do 1 additional point of damage. So that's the character sheet and that's the skills. So let's just go back to our flowchart that we had a second ago and just see where we're up to. So we've rolled the die and we kept all the 6s. By the way, you can only attempt including the push, you can only attempt a particular action once. irrespective of who's attempting it. So it's basically you succeed or you fail based on that. Now, the one thing we didn't talk about was using our pride. We'll talk about that in a second, but we've looked at push. So as we said, we weren't satisfied with the number of successes we got. We pushed, we got additional successes. However, we did have banes, and so that meant we took damage to our wits, and we gained willpower as a result of that damage. Now, important point, if you have equipment in your dice pool, and let's just go back to our character sheet for a second, let's pretend that we had those 2 dice in our dice pool, and we'll just keep the 6 dice and see what happens. Okay, I'm really lucky today, so I didn't get any banes. We'll just roll again, just for the sake of discussion. Right, now, if I was rolling a bane and I pushed, then this would actually, my damage from my gear dice would actually damage my equipment, not my stats. So I would go to my equipment, and I'll just use a weapon as an example. You'll see up here it's got a bonus and a maximum bonus. So I would deduct 1 point from my bonus because I had scored 1 bane point in my gear dice. So my bonus would now go down to 0, which would in effect mean my equipment was close to breaking and it would need to get repaired through a craft roll. So the red dice, the skill dice, can never get a bane. So if you're using handheld dice, if you're using standard D6s, then a 1, you need 3 separate colours for the following, for explicitly this reason. If you're rolling base dice and you roll a 1, which is a bane, then that will cause stat damage to whatever stat you were rolling. You will ignore the ones in your skill pool because actually you can't take a bane in your skill pool, and then you will, if you get a 1 in your gear dice, that will reduce the effectiveness of your equipment. So that's how the bane will work in that case. So let's now just have a quick look at the things we can do to improve our skill rolling success rate. So I'm just going to go to our flowchart again and go to the second page. Oh, one thing actually before I move on. So pride. So once per game session, I can call upon my pride when I fail a roll. I therefore add a D12 to my skill roll. So I can go, I'm really wanting to do this, and you'll see they've got this little D12 symbol. So now I'm going to go 2, 2, 2 and a D12, and you'll see that up here, hopefully. Yes, okay. Now, here's the thing. A D12 can have up to 4 successes, I think, append to it. So if I add a D8, I can get up to 2 successes. If I add a D10, I think I can get up to 3, and if I add a D12, I think I can get up to 4. I'd need to check the table. But irrespective, there's a table that tells you how many successes you get depending on your dice rolls. So if I just roll again in the hope that I'll get lucky this time, nope, and a third time for the sake of discussion, yes, okay, so I got 1 additional success from my D12. Now, if I fail a roll, so if I basically say, no, I'm going to call upon my pride and try again, and I still fail the roll, then my pride is wiped. I lose my pride, I delete it from my character sheet, I don't get to use the pride for the rest of the session, and between the session I'm playing and the next session, I need to come up with a completely new pride to put in its place. So use your pride because it's there for a reason. However, recognize that if you still fail the roll when you've called upon your pride for your second dice roll instead of using push, you run the very real risk of losing your pride, and then you will have to create a new one. Okay, so as I was saying, let's go to the second page of the skills and talk about the other things that we can do. So we can ask for assistance. So I can get up to 3 players to help me complete a skill roll. Each one adds a single dice to my base. I think it is. Yes. No, actually, sorry, it goes to your skill. It does not go to your base, it goes to your skill. I can also obviously get negative and positive dice added just through conditions. So I could be attempting to climb a very difficult wall, I could be attempting to climb a very easy wall. In the case of an easy wall, I would add 1 dice, and if it was a formidable climb effort, I would reduce 3 dice of my thing. Important point, if I take my skill, now those dice append to my skill roll, so if I'm adding 1 dice to my skill roll, that's all goodness. So that goes up to 3, then I roll again. I'll just take away the d12, and now I'm rolling an additional red die, which actually, as it turns out, has come to fruition. However, if for some reason I had minus 3, so that formidable wall, and I had started with a skill of 2, then I'm actually at minus 1. And so I now click the minus 1 button on my Roll20 sheet, or I just roll a specific skill die, which I will now use in effect to reduce my number of successes. So when I roll that, you'll see here I didn't get anything, so that was lucky. If that had come up as a success, I would have reduced my number of successes by 1. So a negative skill roll is a really powerfully bad thing. So if I have 2 dice, I can go down to 3. I can roll again for the sake of discussion. And if any of those were a success, and any of these were a success, I would actually deduct the number of minus successes that I got from my other successes. So if I'd rolled 3 successes in my negative pool, and I had rolled 3 successes between my base and my gear dice, then I would actually end up with 0, because I would take 3 off for the skill that I had rolled, and I would deduct those from the other 2. So that's a very bad thing. Do not get too many negative dice. The other 2 things just to talk about is opposed rolls and group rolls. So as a general statement, only the aggressor can push. So if you are in a conflict with someone, social, combat, just using opposed skills, like you're stealthing, you're trying to dodge them, they're using scouting to see you, you're using manipulate, they're using insight, then you, as the person who's initiating the activity, can push your die. They, as the defender, cannot. But if they cancel out all your successes, it has no effect on them. For instance, if you rolled 2 dice for stealth, and they rolled 2 dice for scouting, then it would be 0 successes. You would get 0 successes, and it would assumedly fail. If the only place where this doesn't play out is in parries and dodges, and we'll cover those off when we talk about combat, but it is slightly different. With a group roll, normally what happens is we choose the best person for the role, or potentially the worst, and I'll give you an example of both. So the best person for the role usually applies in almost every circumstance, but for a direct example, when you are scouting, when you are all on lookout looking for something, it is normally the person with the best scouting who's making the scouting roll. The other players can assist them, but you would normally give it to them. If you're trying to sneak past the orcish guards, then you would normally roll the worst stealth, because of course the orc doesn't need to see all of you, it just needs to see the least skilled of you to know that something's going wrong. So that's an example of the difference between those 2 things. So once again, just to repeat, you normally would take the best die roll of the best player. It's up to player nomination, as in the players decide amongst themselves, but that would be the normal way of things. The exception is with stealth, where it will normally be the person with the worst skill, or any situation actually where the person who's least proficient failing damns all of you, and stealth is the most obvious example. Okay, I think that'll do. So that's skills. Now what we're going to do after this is I'm going to talk through travel, and then I'm going to talk through combat. Okay, thanks very much.